Hi there. So now that we've discussed cartilaginous fish, I want to describe the other group of fish, bony fish. So this is most fish that you think of when you think of fish with bone skeletons. So the technical term, again, when we're talking about these types of fish is osteichthyes. Oste, obviously meaning bone, like when we talk about things like osteoporosis being related to bone. Ichthyes here meaning fish, so literally does mean bonefish. They're divided into two smaller groups, the ray-finned fishes, which again, this is the majority of fish that we're talking about and thinking about, and then lobe-finned fishes. So when you see these kind of fleshy lobes here, that's when we're talking about this particular group. Not very many of these still left on Earth right now, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. So for ray-finned fishes, there are many, many species of these. Let me go ahead and move my little graphic here so you can see one of the species I'm blocking off. Many species, we refer to these as the dominant class of vertebrates. So again, of all vertebrate life on Earth, the greatest variety and the biggest amount of species, the biggest amount of total populations, we're looking at ray-finned fishes. There's just a huge variety of them in the ocean. Kind of makes sense when we think about how the ocean covers most of the Earth. They have rays on their fins. Again, we're talking about those little filaments that help support the membranes of the fins that they have. And they have swim bladders. It's an important distinction when we start talking about these guys versus sharks in terms of how they keep their buoyancy. And we'll talk more about swim bladders here in a little bit. So I wanted to demonstrate the variety with lots of pictures of them here. We've got things like salmon, moray eels, the oarfish, flounder, frogfish, and other types of little walking fish. And sturgeon. These are all different types of ray-finned fishes. Most fish you think of are ray-finned fishes. The other group that we're talking about then is lobe-finned fishes. So this is the one where most of them are extinct, but there are a couple of remnants here on Earth. The ones that are left are mostly lungfish and coelacanths. So that's really all that we're looking at now in terms of lobe-finned fish that are alive today. They have muscular lobes with fins, and it's a little bit more obvious here on our coelacanth. But if you look at the way that these parts function and where they're located, this is where we're starting to look at the transition between fish to amphibians. These fleshy lobes, especially when you look at the bone structure with them, will have some resemblance to the digits that we see in fingers. So these are part of the group that help with that transition. They also, a lot of them use lungs in terms of respiration. So again, their swim bladder has been modified to function the way that we think of lungs functioning now. And that's most visible in the lungfish. So again, when you look at this presentation on Classroom, this video explains kind of how the lungfish works. Again, they mostly go into a period of dormancy, but when they're in that period of dormancy, whenever it's the dry season in their native environment, they can breathe through those lungs in order to be able to survive. So take a look at that clip, pretty good. Part of Nat Geo's World's Weirdest Series. So when we're talking about bony skeletons, again, this is in contrast to our cartilaginous fish with their cartilaginous skeletons. Here we can see the skeleton of a ray-finned fish and the skeleton of a lobe-finned fish. And I put this little emphasis down here at the bottom. If you're looking at the fins specifically between a ray-finned fish and a lobe-finned fish, you can see that you can see those filaments, those ray supports in the ray-finned fish. But the lobe-finned fish, you're kind of seeing a heavier concentration of these bones. Again, that's what we're looking at whenever we're starting to transition into a foot. But still, true to fish form, they do not have digits. They still have limbs without digits. It's not quite to that point yet. So again, thinking about what do they eat? Again, with animals like this where we see a lot of variety, there is a lot of feeding styles. So we talk a little bit about mouths in terms of their locations. So this is an example of a superior mouth, a terminal mouth, and an inferior mouth. That just has to do with the position relative to the body. Superior points upward, terminal points forward, inferior points below. And this gives an indication to the feeding style for these types of fish. So fish like the archer fish aim for prey that's above them. If you've heard of archer fish before, you know that they also shoot water above the surface to try and knock insects onto the surface of the water. So they're going for prey that's above them. Terminal mouths, again, go for prey that's in front of a fish. You sometimes see what we call protrusible or extendable mouths whenever we talk about terminal mouths, like with our kissing gourami here. And then when we talk about a excuse me, an inferior mouth, like on a catfish here, we're looking at something that's a bottom feeder. Again, most of its food's going to be underneath it whenever it's trying to eat. Some more specific mouth types that kind of, again, give an impression about what these animals eat. You've probably seen what you think of as suckerfish in aquariums or Plecostomus. These are algae eaters, so they scrape algae off of surfaces like rocks and, of course, glass in aquariums. You have some fish with kind of sharp little needle noses, and again, that's for getting into tight spaces where prey can easily hide. And then if we look at the parrotfish here on the bottom, we see these kind of chisel-like teeth. They're also algae eaters like our Plecostomus, but their approach is a little bit different. They have to scrape it off of coral and coral reefs, so they actually have some pronounced kind of teeth there that help them with working kind of like a chisel to knock things off of that rocky surface. Here, when we talk again about swim bladders, this is what we were talking about in terms of buoyancy with this group. So these are gas-filled sacs that regulate buoyancy. So again, the principle on the way that these air sacs work seems pretty straightforward. If they inflate it with gas, they'll move up higher in the water column. If they reduce the amount of gas, they will move lower into the water column. That's just kind of how that organ functions. Like we already talked about, they've been modified into lungs with lobe-fin fishes. So again, they use them when they kind of breach the surface of the water to draw air in to get their oxygen. So when we start talking about bony fish locomotion, they can use different amounts of their body to help them move forward or backward, and their fins are all kind of used at different rates as well. There's just a lot of different fish body varieties in terms of how they move. So again, I would recommend watching this TED Ed clip about why are fish shaped in order to kind of look at that a little bit more in terms of how fish move relative to their body shape and size. When we start talking about gills, let me move down here a little bit. So again, most of our bony fish will use gills to get oxygen out of the water, the ones who aren't using the swim bladder as lungs. Water has 2.5% oxygen content as air, so fish use a pumping mechanism to move water through their gills and transfer oxygen into their bloodstream. So again, a key point here is what we refer to as the operculum or gill cover, just a very hard surface. If you've ever seen fish kind of flapping that gill cover, again, they're pumping water over the gills to try and help get oxygen transferred into that area. When we look at the gills up close, like here in this section, we see tons and tons of these little blood vessels inside of here. This is what helps their circulatory system to get oxygen into the bloodstream. So again, it's a unique approach. Animals that have gills will use this particular method. For circulating that blood around, all of our fish only have a 2-chambered heart, so their circulation generally not seen as the most powerful compared to mammals and birds. Mammals and birds have a 4-chambered heart like we do. So again, we see a little bit of difference there. Defense mechanisms, let me move back up here again. Camouflage is a big one. Here we're seeing counter shading again, like what we talked about with sharks before. So dark on top, light on the bottom. So if you're swimming above it, the dark blends in with the sea floor. White on the bottom blends in with sunlight coming from above. This triggerfish is giving us an example of disruptive coloration. So it's hard to kind of tell where this animal starts and where it ends. It's got these white blotches. The eye is right behind this little mask. There's yellow spots here on the tail. It's designed to make it hard for a predator to figure out which end do I want to approach? How do I want to try to attack this thing? We have some fish that are semi-transparent, like this X-ray fish. We have some that camouflage like their environment, like the leafy sea dragon. We see these grass eels. Again, they're designed to resemble vegetation. And then the flounder here, which is blending in with the sea floor. All of these are designed to be different types of camouflage. Schooling is another defense mechanism. You've probably seen fish moving in large groups like this. A lot of fish that do this have this kind of iridescent shininess to them. And again, it's when they all kind of move and light plays off of their body that it makes it hard for predators to pick out one individual fish that they're going to take from that group. So Schools help protect the majority of the fish, even if one or two of them end up dying in the process, but schooling is kind of a smart way for fish to move together and stay protected together. Some fish also have external defense mechanisms. So again, some can inflate to larger sizes. Most fish have to swallow their food completely. So if you can puff up with air and be larger than the throat that's going to try to swallow you, it makes you impossible to swallow. Those spikes certainly don't hurt either whenever you're a porcupine fish. Well, they do literally hurt, but they don't hurt for defending yourself as far as an additional thing to help you. So again, porcupine puffers use both of those defense mechanisms. Some, like the lionfish, have spines on their body that are actually venomous, so they help deliver venom that would attack their predator. And then little ones here, like the boxfish, will actually let loose a poison around their bodies. That's why it has this natural warning color here, that bright yellow, one of nature's warning colors. And then finally, if we're looking here at the catfish, you can see these little tiny kind of spikes or spurs on either side. If you've ever heard of anyone handling catfish before and they're like, I got stung by a catfish, they weren't lying. There are little spikes that they can use to defend themselves externally. So again, check out this video, another Ted Ed one, How Do Fish Make Electricity? This again talks about how some fish use electricity to hunt down prey. Almost all of them can pick up on electric signals, but some of them can use it to stun and kill their prey as well. So as far as senses kind of tied into that, they can sense acoustically. Again, as sound travels through water, they're able to pick that up. The lateral line, again, kind of obvious here. That line that runs lateral to the body lets them change or pick up changes in water pressure or changes in the water around them. Again, good eyesight, good sense of smell, and that electroreception for picking up electrical signals. For reproduction with your bony fish, it almost always is going to be external fertilization or spawning. So we see these Cory catfish going through that here. Here's a female releasing a batch of eggs. And what's going to happen is that males are going to find that patch of eggs and they release a cloud of sperm called milt that will basically have all the sperm that's needed for that fertilization to take place. It all takes place outside of the body. That's what we mean by external fertilization. Coelacanths are kind of an exception to the rule. They fertilize internally and they produce live young, but that is not most bony fish when we're talking about that. Parental care is rare in bony fish, but we see a couple of examples over here. We've got seahorses where, again, the dad is known for taking the eggs inside of a pouch and raising them. And then we've got the cardinal fish down here where one of the parents will hold the babies within its mouth and kind of go on a hunger strike for a while it's letting its young develop inside of there. So again, rare but not unheard of that parents will take care of some of the young there. Some fish are also capable of changing their sex characteristics, which helps with reproduction. So this is the last part of the video. Watch this clip about sex-changing clownfish again. It talks about how basically their social dynamic causes them to express either female sex characteristics, male sex characteristics, or neither. Sometimes they don't express any sex characteristics at all. So I hope this gave you a little bit more insight into bony fish. Again, it's a very large group, so it's a lot to discuss, but I hope that this helps give you some idea for what makes them distinct.